years ago, I took a look at Bright Memory. I mentioned in that video that I took the time to do so because Microsoft showed off a preview of Bright Memory Infinite at their Xbox Series X unveiling presentation in 2020. I played the game for about 3 hours before seeing the credits twice, so it struck me as more of a tech demo or proof of concept. I had my issues with it that you can hear all about with the help of the card in the top right corner, but now it has come time for Infinite's release. I've been excited for this one for a while, but I also know I'm pretty late to the party here, so let's not delay any longer. This is Bright Memory Infinite. We've got ourselves a similar beast to the original Bright Memory, or as it was originally called, Bright Memory Episode 1, which explains a lot. Anyway, we're looking at a first-person action game that combines multiple firearms with multiple hard-hitting methods of fire with big super attacks and other special moves. And we're going to dive into combat straight away because jumping the gun a bit here, it's the most you're going to get out of this game. Alright, our Uncanny Valley anime waifu has a bunch of new tricks up her sleeve this time. But we do still have all of our abilities from Bright Memory. Our heavy-ass double jump is here, our backwards and sideways dash is here, our wide assortment of weapons have returned as a means of attacking from a distance. Things such as an assault rifle, a shotgun, a handgun, and eventually a new sniper rifle. We have our sword that can be slashed in front of us to combo enemies and send shockwaves out, a basic launcher to get them into the air. The best new addition is the block button, which can be timed to parry enemy attacks. But after spending some time in the upgrade menu, you can gain access to some special moves. An aerial slam that can lift enemies into the air, a chargeable slash that can send out a spinning light blade that tracks enemies. Our arm can still launch enemies with the EMP ability, but now it can be used to pull enemies close to us as well, and similar upgrades to the sword can be gotten for the arm. And I'm not gonna lie, initially this combat system overwhelmed me a bit. It might not sound like much, but I found myself getting taken down by enemies left and right because I was getting my inputs tangled up. Even after going into the settings menu and fiddling with the key bindings trying to make them work for me, it was a bit much. I eventually found ones that worked for me, but it took a lot of tinkering. Now, it got easier to find my inputs, but that doesn't mean it got any less cumbersome to use them. My first major issue with combat is how special moves are handled. The charged sword slash is an awesome move that has great coverage and damage to boot, but to activate it, you have to hold the melee button down after sprinting for a second. This wouldn't be a problem if you just had to hold the button down, but you have to actually sprint. Tricky thing is, this is a first-person game. You can't sprint sideways or backwards, and you can't charge it after a dash, which is what the sprint button does when pressed after those directions. To use these powerful moves, you have to sprint towards the enemy for a second, or turn around and pray that no one is firing a projectile at you. And it doesn't just take a second to charge the move to full power either, it takes a hot ass minute. It's worth it for bosses and melee focused enemies, but groups of ranged enemies will shred you up if you try anything fancy on them. And here, I was trying to do a launcher, but the game has Shelia automatically charge her spinning blade move because I was sprinting. The jumping charge attacks aren't the end of the world because you just have to jump for them to activate, but I think the combat system in general could have greatly benefited from the ability to map specific attacks to buttons, instead of baseline actions like blade and EMP glove. Attacks being dictated by whether or not you're running, crouching, or jumping would be different in a third-person game where your field of view is greatly improved and you're able to keep your attention on the enemy if you need to retreat for a second, but in a first-person game, it's just clumsy. With things like the lack of a radar or HUD elements to give you an indication on where out-of-view enemies are exacerbating this issue. Getting blindsided by melee enemies is a common occurrence when things start to ramp up. Projectiles can be easily thrown back at whichever enemy you can aim at, which is a legitimately cool feature. Deflecting incoming fire from one enemy at a different enemy never failed to get a smile out of me, but you also have to stay very mobile so as to not get rushed down by those melee enemies. It can make for a frustrating mix of goals and dangers when mistakes get made. Now, thankfully, turtling behind the block button works way better than it has any right to, with enemies literally breaking all the way down to their animations from being unable to think of a way to beat you, standing there showing them how shiny this sword is. I mean, a group of basic enemies can be beaten flawlessly by standing still, aiming, and holding down one button. I also realized that my equipped gun reloaded after a perfect deflection, which was weird but also kinda cool at the same time. This was especially apparent in boss fights, where depending on which one it is, you can stand still and time your button presses along with spamming your guns or sword to win. Other fights did mix in hazards that would cover the ground after physical strikes, but bosses were really a mixed bag in general. Thankfully, they are 100% better than the ones from from Bright Memory, but they still feel ever so slightly undercooked. Let me just say now that I had fun with most of them, but it either felt like I was absolutely embarrassing them, like straight up pantsing them and giving them a fucking swirly, or I was running in a circle trying not to get pelted with cheap shots by their minions or some ass teleportation attacks. I would have loved it if the tougher melee enemies and bosses alike had some way to break me out of a block, because then you wouldn't have to rely on grunt enemies running around the boss's feet to make the fight interesting, which is my #1 boss fight pet peeve. The most efficient strategy I found for taking bosses down was using every gun's special ammunition. The assault rifle shoots homing micro missiles, the shotgun shoots this wave of fire, I guess it's napalm or something, the handgun is just a straight up grenade launcher which decimates everything, and the sniper shoots timed sticky grenades. Every single one of these ammunition types staggers everything. This includes every single boss. On top of slapping everything silly, it does an insane amount of damage compared to the rest of your arsenal. Using these things to stun the boss long enough to charge up an even bigger attack was a great feeling. And the fact that you have so many of these things that drain the boss's health bars doesn't make the fights feel like they drag on, which is a problem Episode 1 had very badly. That's the thing about combat in Infinite. When it works, it really works and makes you feel amazing. But when things slow down or elements start to stack in unpleasant ways, you can really see and feel the flaws. The beginning of the game starts off super weak. In hindsight, mainly because of how weak the player feels. This is nothing new for most action games though, with the beginning of repeat playthroughs feeling particularly stale, but that's just the key word. Repeat playthroughs. I feel that Bright Memory Infinite's lack of truly original or interesting combat maneuvers in the first hours of the game makes it difficult for players to feel like this combat system is worth the time investment to learn its oddities and quirks. The charge attacks, the alternate firing methods, the weird way in which juggling works, it all feels more limiting than I personally think it should. The second playthrough was much better because I had a grasp on things and I was actually able to chain together attacks in fun ways. This is how the game feels like it was meant to be played. Also, the first-person perspective. I'll say it again, but I hate this camera for this kind of game. It just doesn't work. And I might have said the first few hours right there, but the game is actually only like 2.5 hours long. The entire time I was playing through the game, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was being crammed into the final mission of a bigger game. There are enough action-packed set pieces and good ideas to boot to prop up a 6 to 7 hour experience if properly fleshed out. And I would believe you if you told me this game was directed by Michael Bay. But I also feel that there should have been more before this, and I know technically there was, but Infinite could have benefited from some different scenery, different paces for different situations besides the constant balls to the wall gunplay and swordplay, and a stupid stealth section that can be easily cheesed by sliding everywhere doesn't scratch my itch for unique gameplay. Same goes for this car segment and these QTEs that don't have any interesting consequences. If you don't press the button in time, you just have to watch the cutscene again. Sorry, back on track. The short length of the game could be to give players a reason to run back through again, because you're ranked at the end of every playthrough, and that sounds great if there was something new to experience or look forward to when going back through. This has got to be some of the most uninteresting level design I have ever seen. First-person shooter, third-person action game, it doesn't matter. I remember being so hyped after seeing this airplane section in one of the trailers, but in the actual game, it literally lasts less than 2 minutes. You grapple onto the wing of this plane that's going down, fight some goons while hopping to another plane, and then you just jump down. It was such a letdown for what was essentially a new backdrop for what I've already been experiencing the entire game. The scenery may have changed, but the scenario is the same as what it's been since I started. What I'm getting at here is there's nothing interesting to use or interact with in these gunfights. There is some Titanfall-esque wall running in a few sections. It's cool, but it's only available on certain walls. Like, you can't wall run into a charged sword slam or anything cool like that. There were so many times where the game is trying to be cool, but if I try to go even slightly off the script, it can't take it. Just look at this set piece I busted because I walked slightly off the beaten path. I'm supposed to be running away from this airship, but if you get close enough to it, the shots can't damage you anymore for some reason. I noted so many instances where invisible walls straight up stopped me from exploring a potentially fun new route. I noted several instances where allowing me to freely use the wall run would have made for some actually interesting choices on my part, but there just seems to be no real desire to give the players that kind of freedom when in a firefight. It was hallway after hallway for the entire adventure with no interest in deviations, which doesn't motivate me to replay this campaign for any reason, especially not a superficial better rank, which is really a shame too, because this game has some of the most incredible looking environments I've seen in a long time. The swaying of the colorful trees along with the rain and wind make for some gorgeous weather effects. The water and foliage are a sight to behold, and I really don't have anything bad to say about the environments as a whole. Most of the characters look fine, but I can't get over how Shelia looks like a porcelain doll with some awkwardly stiff animations most of the time. And when selecting a new costume, well, you get a good idea of where the team's priorities were. There are other small problems like how the enemies that are killed in the middle of an attack will still have active hitboxes, so I counted a time or two where an enemy I killed in the middle of an attack killed me from the grave. On top of being completely at a loss when turtling behind the block button, enemies just have some pretty interesting AI altogether. Music is the typical dramatic orchestral stuff you would expect, and none of it really stuck with me, but some of the situations are interesting. The combat is fun once the correct abilities are unlocked and could still be vastly improved if individual moves could be mapped to their own keys, but the thing that hurts my enjoyment the most when coming back is that level design, and just how railroaded you are the whole time, and unfortunately, you feel it when you play. You get that feeling that you fought these enemies in this same hallway on several different occasions. If you had some environments that were a bit more interesting to fight through, or you had a method of interacting with these environments beyond the basic stuff, I have no doubt this game would be worth more than an initial playthrough. But as it stands, Bright Memory Infinite is harmless if you can find it on Gamepass or on sale for under $10, but you could probably get just as much from watching a high quality playthrough on YouTube. Maybe an episode 3 will improve even further on these systems and we can get closer to something that's a worthwhile, replayable experience. However, until then, you're better off playing something like Doom Eternal or Devil May Cry 5 in the meantime. As for what's next on the docket, it's time for the big boy, guys. Elden Ring is coming out so soon, and I'm so ready for it. But after that, I think it'll finally be time to tell you guys how I feel about Halo Infinite. I've been able to play it and put some time into it while taking care of the backlog and the newer games alike, but I'll finally be ready to tackle that beast after Elden Ring. I can only hope you'll stick around and join me next time when I look at Elden Ring and then Halo Infinite. Then after that, I'll be on to some personal projects, like a certain retrospective maybe, involving a young boy with juju powers. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.